In this tutorial, we're going to model a retro laser gun. Then we're going to add basic materials, lights, and render it in Eevee. As always, I'll use a lot of keyboard shortcuts, and I'll do my best to announce them. The keys I'm pressing will also appear in the bottom right corner. Note that this is a pretty fast-paced tutorial, so feel free to pause and rewind if you miss anything. First of all, I'm going to box select all the default objects and press Delete, followed by Shift A to create a new object. Then under Mesh, I will select UV Sphere. The default geometry of the sphere is too dense for my purposes, so I'm going to change the number of segments to 12 and rings to 6. And now I'll turn my sphere into the laser gun. First I'm going to press R for rotation tool, then Y to limit the rotation to Y-axis, and then I will type in 90 to rotate it 90 degrees. I will then tab into the edit mode, press 1 on my keyboard to make sure I'm in vertex select mode, select the vertex at the pole of the sphere, and press Ctrl numpad plus until the two nearest rings of vertices are selected. I will then press delete and select vertices to delete my selection. The resulting shape will be the back of our laser gun. Before I continue modeling, I'm going to slightly tweak the orientation of the model. While still in edit mode, I'm going to press A to select everything, followed by R for rotate tool, Z to constrain the rotation to Z-axis, and finally minus 90 for negative 90 degrees. The reason I rotated the model was pretty much personal preference. Now when I press numpad 3 for right orthographic view, I can continue modeling from right to left, which in the case of this model just feels more natural. To continue modeling, I'm going to press 2 for edge select mode, hold down Alt and select the leftmost edge. This will select the whole edge loop, which I can then extrude by pressing E, followed by Y to constrain the extrusion to Y-axis, and extending it around this much. Now I want this shape to bulge in the middle, so first I'm going to have to add a little bit more geometry. I'm going to hover over the cylindrical part, press Ctrl R for loop cut, and scroll the mouse wheel up to get the number of loop cuts to 4. I will then left click to apply the change and right click to keep the cuts in place. Now let's alt click the second edge loop from the right, click this icon at the top to enable proportional editing, and press S for scale tool. Now as you scale up the edge loop, you'll notice the surrounding geometry creating this nice fall off effect. To control the strength of the fall off, you can scroll the mouse wheel up and down. In our case, we'll scroll it up until it's about this wide. Then we'll Alt select the open edge and press F to cap it off with a new face. Now that we have the basic shape, let's create the antenna part of our gun. First, I'm going to disable proportional editing. Then with this front face still selected, I'm going to press I to inset it, then E to extrude it inwards, followed by another inset, and another extrusion, this time outwards. Then I'm going to press S and scale the tip of the cylinder like so. Now let's put a little ball at the tip of our gun. Since the newly created objects appear at the location of the 3D cursor, I'm going to first align the 3D cursor with the selected face at the tip of the gun. I'm going to press Shift S for the cursor menu and choose Cursor to Selected. I can now delete the selected face by pressing Delete and selecting Faces. And finally, after all this preparation, I will press Shift A and create another UV sphere. I will also make sure that the new sphere has 12 segments and 6 rings, just like the original one. I will now make sure that the poles of the new sphere are aligned with the Y-axis. So I'm going to press R for rotate tool, X to constrain the rotation to the X-axis, and type in 90 to rotate by 90 degrees. Then I'm going to press S and scale the ball to the right size. Now let's fix the overlap with the rest of the model by pressing G for move tool, Y to only move on the Y-axis, and move it out about this far. Now let's join it with the rest of the model. To do that, I'm going to press 1 for vertex select, select the vertex at the pole, press delete and select vertices. Then I'll switch to edge select mode by pressing 2, alt click on the edge of the hole to select the edge loop, then hold down shift and select the corresponding edge loop on the main model. And with both of the loops selected, I'll right click on one of them and choose bridge edge loops. And now they're connected. Now let's add another fun little detail. For that I'm going to press Ctrl R and scroll the mouse wheel up to add 2 more edge loops. Then left click to apply, move them a bit forward, and right click to apply the position. I will then press Shift D to duplicate and right click to keep the copies in place. Then I'm going to press S to scale and Shift Y to prevent scaling on the Y-axis. Now let's give those rings some volume. For that I'm going to press E and Y to extrude on the Y-axis. Then I'm going to press 3 for face select mode, hold down Shift and Alt select all 3 rings. Then Alt E and extrude faces along normals. And it's starting to look like something. Let's add another detail to make the model look more interesting. I'm going to Alt select the first 2 edge loops, press Alt E and extrude faces along normals. Later I'm going to get back to it to add more detail, but for now it's good enough. The last thing we're going to model is the grip. To make the grip, I'm going to select 4 faces on the underside of my model, press I and inset them a little bit, then numpad 3 for side view, and extrude the selected faces. Now let's add some details to the grip. For that we'll need to refine the geometry. So I'm going to press Ctrl R to add a loop cut and slide it almost all the way up. And then another loop cut and slide it to about here. Now this area in the middle is where the hand is supposed to grip the gun, so let's make it a bit more ergonomic. I'm going to create 2 more loop cuts and position them just above and below the existing ones. Then I'm going to press 3 for face select mode, Alt select the faces in the middle, and scale them down a tiny bit. Then I'm going to press numpad 1 for front view, followed by S and X to make the grip skinnier on the X-axis. Then I will select these 2 faces at the bottom, press numpad 3 for right orthographic view, then press G and drag out the selected faces forward like so. Now I'm really happy with the overall shape, but I do want to get rid of this low poly look. So I'll tab out of the edit mode, right click on the gun and select Shade Smooth. Now this is better, but not quite good enough. For the model to look nice and smooth, I need much denser geometry. To address that, I'm going to go to the Modifiers tab and add the Subdivision Surface modifier. I will also match viewport smoothing and render smoothing. And it's starting to look a lot better. But the edges are too smooth and lack definition. To address that, I'm going to add more geometry to the edges I want to look sharper. First, I'm going to tab back into the edit mode, press 2 for edge select mode, and Alt select this edge over here. Now I'm going to flatten it by giving it a 0 scale on the Z-axis. I will type in S, Z, and 0. And now that it's flat, I'm going to sharpen the edge by beveling it. Ctrl B and scroll the mouse wheel up to insert an extra segment. Next, I'm going to Alt select this edge above, press G twice and slide it almost all the way to the top. Now let's tab out of the edit mode and check out the result. I think I'm happy with the grip and ready to move on. Let's define a few more sharp edges. For that, I'll temporarily disable the Subdivision Surface modifier, tab into the edit mode, select this edge over here, and give it a fine bevel, scrolling my mouse wheel up to make sure my bevel has 2 segments. Then I'm going to select and bevel 3 more edges, but this time I'll make the bevel a lot less sharp. I think that's good. Next, I'm going to select the inner edge and give it a rather sharp bevel with 2 segments. And finally, I'm going to select the edge of the ball at the tip, give it a sharp bevel, and scale it down to make it even more defined. And it's time to re-enable the Subdivision Surface modifier and have a good look at the model. I'm pretty happy with the shape so far, and I think the modeling part is almost done. The last thing we're going to add is the trigger. First thing I'm going to do is disable the Subdivision Surface modifier, Then zoom in on the grip and tab into the edit mode. Now let's Alt select this edge loop and straighten it by giving it 0 scale on the Z-axis. I will do it by pressing S, Z, and 0. Next I'm going to insert another edge loop with Ctrl R and straighten it the same way as the first one. Then I'll press 3 for face select mode and shift select these two faces. Then I to inset them a little bit, E to extrude them inwards, then another tiny inset, and an outward extrude. So let's re-enable Subdivision Surface, tab out of the edit mode and check out the result. Generally it looks good, but a little bit too smooth and organic to my taste, so I'm going to use the same edge beveling technique to take care of that. And since the technique is the same, I don't think I need to comment every step, so I'm just going to go ahead and finish it off. I think the gun looks great now, and I can consider the modeling complete. In the next part of this tutorial, we're going to create lights and materials and render out the final scene. So let's turn on Material Preview mode, go to Materials tab, and create a new material. This material is going to apply to most of our model, so I'm going to name it Primary. Next, I replace the base color with a hex value I picked earlier. You can pick your own color if you like. Next, I'm going to make the material shiny by setting the roughness to 0.1. This will make it look like plastic, which is exactly what I want. Before creating my next material, I'm going to add one extra bit of geometry. The need for it will become very clear when I apply my next material. So let's tab into the edit mode and add another loop cut. Now let's zoom in and create a very thin bevel with 3 segments. We will then turn on face edit mode and Alt select the middle loop. Now let's zoom back out, press Alt E, select extrude faces along normals, and extrude the selection inwards. And now that we have this little separation, we can proceed to the next material. Before creating the material, I'll select the geometry it will apply to. So I'll tab into the edit mode, press 1 for vertex selection, and select the vertex at the tip. I will now grow my selection by pressing Ctrl numpad plus until I see the selection go down into the dividing geometry. And now I'm ready to create a new material, which I will assign to this selection. Let's click the plus icon to create a new material slot, and then new to create the material itself. I will name the new material metal, and scroll down to adjust its settings. First I will make the base color a bit darker, then set roughness to 0.1, and metallic to 1. Now if I scroll up and assign this material to the selected geometry, I'm going to get this nice metallic look. And if you zoom in over here, you will see how the geometry is hiding the transition between two materials. Now let's create a material that will provide an accent color. Just like before, I'm going to create a new material slot, then create a new material in it, and call it Accent 1. Now just like in the case of my primary material, I'm going to set the color to a specific hex value. And just like the other materials, this one will have a roughness of 0.1. Now let's apply the material to its corresponding geometry. In edit mode, press 3 for face select, and Alt select this loop over here. Now expand your selection with Ctrl numpad plus, and assign our material to selection. Now to add to the colorful retro look, I'm going to create another accent color and assign it to the trigger and the ball at the tip. Since I'm going to be using the exact same techniques as before, I'm just going to quickly get through it without commenting every step. Well, looks like it's finally time to add the last, but probably the most impactful material. But first, let's select the geometry that's going to receive it. I'm going to select the rings by hovering over them and pressing L. And once they're selected, I'm going to create another material and call it glow. Then I will assign the material to the rings, change the surface property to emission, set strength to 10, and pick a color. Now the emission shader is supposed to give us the glow effect, but so far it's a bit underwhelming. To make it look right, let's go to render properties, make sure the renderer is set to Eevee, and enable bloom. Now this is way better. The only thing I'm going to tweak is the radius. I'm going to set it to 4 so that the glow stays closer to the rings. I think I'm done with the glowing material, but since I'm already in the render settings, I'll also enable ambient occlusion. This will give me nice contact shadows in areas like the trigger. And we're done with our materials. Next, we're going to set up lights, camera, and render the scene out. Before I can set up lights and camera, it looks like I have some cleanup to do. Looking at the gun from above, I realized it's not centered relative to the world origin. Luckily, it's an easy fix. Let's right-click on the model in object mode and select Set Origin, Origin to Geometry. That takes care of the model's origin point. Now let's place our model at the world origin. First I'm going to press Shift S and select Cursor to World Origin. Then Shift S again, but this time I will choose Selection to Cursor. And here's our gun properly centered. One more thing I'd like to do is set realistic scale. These dimensions are way too big for a handheld gun. So I'm going to scale it to about 0.4 meters on the x-axis. Then I'm going to press numpad dot to refocus the viewport. And I'm finally ready to set up a camera. Before I set up the camera, I'm going to choose the aspect ratio and resolution of my render. I want my final image to be a square, so I'm going to go to the Output Properties tab and make sure that both X and Y resolutions are 1080 pixels. I am now ready to create my camera, so I will press Shift A and select Camera. Now, cameras can be positioned like any other object using the Move tool, but I'm going to use a different method. I will position the gun in the viewport in the way that I want it to be seen by the camera, and when I'm happy with what I see, I can press Ctrl-Alt-Numpad 0 to align camera view with the viewport. This concludes my camera setup, and I'm ready to move on to the lighting. This time I'm not planning to put any actual lights in the scene. Instead, I'm going to light it with an environment texture. In the World Properties tab, I'm going to click on the little circle next to Color, and in the menu select Environment Texture. In fact, Blender ships with a few of those textures, so we're going to click Open and navigate to the following folder in the Blender installation directory. The file you're looking for is called courtyard.exr. Once you have it picked, go ahead and enable rendered viewport shading. As you can see, the gun is now fully lit and has really nice reflections. In fact, I'm going to make it a bit brighter by turning up the strength of the environment texture. The only thing that's left is getting rid of the actual background. I will do it by creating a sphere around the entire scene. I'm going to leave the sphere as is, except for the material. I'm going to give my sphere a new material called background. I will set its base color to black, remove specular highlights, and here's my final scene. The only thing that's left is pressing F12 to render the image. And since we're rendering in Eevee, it should take no time at all. Well, this is the end of the tutorial. Thanks a lot for watching. I would really appreciate any feedback. And of course, like and subscribe for more.